Hello, photographers. The most confusing setting in photography is the aperture setting. Aperture is one of the settings that allows us to control how much light we capture when taking a photo. It controls how much light you capture by varying the size of the opening in the lens. But what's confusing is the numbers that are used to tell you how big or how small that opening actually is. The bottom line is that the numbers you see for your aperture setting are backwards, which is confusing to our monkey brains. So I'm going to explain what the numbers mean and show you a trick that will keep you from ever being confused by your aperture setting again. Let's start with what the numbers mean. First and foremost, you have to understand that the aperture settings available to you are specific to the lens that you are using. All lenses share some common aperture settings, but all lenses do not have all the same apertures. So for this video, we're going to look at the apertures available on the common 18 to 55mm kit lens, which are these. These numbers indicate how large the aperture opening is in your lens, and logically, you would assume that an aperture setting of 3.5 would indicate a small opening, which would let in less light because 3.5 is a smaller number. But that is not the case. Instead, an aperture setting of 3.5 indicates a larger opening that will let in more light. Now you might be thinking, why don't they change the aperture numbers so that they make sense? They don't change them because they follow a mathematical logic. See, the number for your aperture setting is determined by a bit of math that compares the focal length of the lens to the diameter of the aperture opening. This is not something you actually need to know, so I'm not going to go into specifics, but I do cover this in my free guide to understanding aperture, which you can get by visiting this link right here. So what's the best way to remember what the aperture numbers mean? My trick is to look at the light that you're shooting in and think of it in terms of light bulb wattage. For example, if it's dim without much light like this, then you could say that the wattage of the light is like 15 watts. 15 watts is a low wattage bulb, and in order to take a photo in that light, you'd use a low aperture number to let in as much of that light as possible. And if it were super bright out, you might say that the wattage of the light is like 100 or 1,000 watts. So with a higher wattage, you'd use a higher aperture to block out that light so your photo is not overexposed. And you don't even have to think of this in terms of actual wattages like 15 or 100. As long as you remember that when the light is low, you use a low aperture number to let in as much light of that light as possible, you'll be fine. So low light, low aperture. And when the light is high and bright, you use a high aperture to block out that light. So high light, high aperture. This simple trick can help you remember what to do with your aperture when you're trying to set your exposure settings. But the aperture setting doesn't just control how much light you capture for a photo, it also affects how your photo will look. What this means is that there are times when you might be in high light, but you actually might want to use a low aperture. Not because of the exposure, but because of how you want the photo to look. So this trick of low light, low aperture and high light, high aperture is not a rule, but a device to help you remember what those numbers mean. And I go over this and more in my guide to understanding aperture, which you can get by visiting this link right here. And if you have any questions about aperture, let me know down in the comments, or photography in general, put them down in the comments right there. And then do me a favor, would you like this video and subscribe to my channel if you really like this video? Please share it with your friends. I appreciate every share. It helps spread the word. But the most important thing you need to do is get out there and take some damn photos. I will see you tomorrow for the live show. All lenses share some common aperture settings, but all lenses do not have, oh my God. Thank you for watching. Now, I get loads of questions and they all boil down to one thing, which is how do I make my camera do what I want it to do? And here's the thing, your camera is like an instrument, and you can't make music if you can't play your instrument. If you want to learn how to play your camera like the instrument it is, visit this link right here to check out my Guide to Shooting in Manual Mode video course.